Hello humans, it's just Martine, and today we're going to be doing the spoiler book tag. I was tagged in this tag by the lovely Amy from AStar Reads. I'm going to link her channel and video down below and also the original tag. But let's get into this. Question 1. What do you consider to be a spoiler? I'm going to go very broad here because the rest of the questions elaborate on this. So in general, I think a spoiler is either a bit about the characters or plot that is not contained in the first 10 to 15% of the book, is not mentioned in the synopsis, or would fundamentally ruin the entire experience of reading it for a person, or change it in some way. I include the note about being in the synopsis because for some reason, some synopses include things that don't happen until like 50% of the way through the book. So I've got to say, if the author's going to spoil that, that's fair game. Number 2, does the genre you're reading impact what you consider to be a spoiler? 100%, absolutely. Allie from Book Binge said in her version of this tag that like you can't spoil nonfiction, and I would tend to agree with that. I'd also add that there are some other things that you absolutely cannot spoil. For instance, the fact that a couple ends up together at the end of a romance book, not like one with a love triangle or anything, just a basic romance book. You can't spoil the fact that they end up together because that's expected. You know what would be a spoiler if you're like, haha, that romance book, they do not end up together. That would be like, what? Number 3, sometimes the best bits are in the trailer or they're included in the synopsis. So do you research books or do you go in blind? In general, sometimes I read a synopsis once or maybe half a synopsis, but by the time I read the book, I almost always forget what the synopsis says. So in general, I go in very blind to the books that I read. And it's quite a lot of fun, actually. And I think it also helps with my expectations of a book. Like, I go in expecting pretty much nothing. So I can't really be disappointed most of the time. Question 4. The question goes something like, sometimes the introduction of the translator's notes can spoil something, especially in classics. Has this ever happened to you? The answer is probably yes, but I don't remember specifically. In general, I think it doesn't bother me when they do that too much. Usually I'm only reading the introduction of a book for, say, either nonfiction, which again we've established you can't really spoil, or for the books that I read in class. Usually if I'm going to read a classic and there's an introduction, but I'm reading the classic for fun, I'm not going to read the introduction because the introduction is the least fun part. That didn't go as planned. Question 5. Name a time somebody spoiled a novel for you. There are 2 instances that I think of pretty much right away when I think of being spoiled for a book. One turned out to be an interesting experiment because it was for a mystery. And so I wasn't particularly mad at that one because I got to see all the foreshadowing and stuff, which is interesting. And that was when I think it might have been Twitter spoiled Stalking Jack the Ripper for me. But again, I didn't care about that too much. The time that I got like pretty upset about the fact that somebody spoiled a book for me had to be when I was in a theater production and we were backstage waiting during a rehearsal, and somebody spoiled Allegiant, the last book in the Divergent trilogy. But like not just for me, like almost nobody standing around us had read it yet. She was like, you know how in Allegiant, blah, 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 and we were like, no, that happens in the last 2 maybe % of the book. Why would we know that? So that was maddening. I ended up continuing on with the Divergent series years later, and it made me so mad when I read that part. I was like, well, we could have avoided this. Number 6. Have you ever spoiled a novel for somebody else? Yes. Here's the thing though. I try only to spoil with permission. For instance, there's something that happens in Kingdom Keeper 7 that is like a huge spoiler, obviously, because it's the last book in the series. My sister has no intention of ever getting around to reading Kingdom Keeper 7. So I specifically asked her one time, is it okay if I spoil something for you from Kingdom Keeper 7? And she was like, yes, I literally could not care less. So I spoiled her in that moment. One time when my sister was reading, I think maybe the 2nd book from Outlander, I accidentally mentioned something, but there are thousands of pages in the series, and I only mentioned one tiny thing, and it was fine. And also, she wasn't upset about it. And sometimes I'll talk about slightly spoilery things from books that I think nobody else is probably ever going to read. But in general, I try to avoid them, or at least say when I'm going to use them. For instance, if you don't want to be spoiled for Kingdom Keepers, like don't watch the series on my channel where I reread Kingdom Keepers, because that is 99.9% spoilers. Number 7, if spoilers ruin novels, which I think is a fundamental assumption you're making that is not entirely correct, but if they do, are there some authors or genres that you cannot reread? In general, I don't like to reread things, so this does not matter for me. However, for the same reason that being spoiled for the end of Stalking Jack the Ripper made the reading experience interesting in a different way, I would argue that there are some interesting parts of rereading any type of book. So no, but that being said, I probably would not reread it because I don't really reread books. Number 8, when reviewing, are you spoiler free? And does this limit your ability to discuss? So in general, again, I try to stay spoiler free. This can limit your ability to discuss, but if you really care that much about the discussion, you can easily have a spoiler-filled section or separate video, in my opinion. And people can choose whether or not they want to engage with that content. For instance, like, I know that I would never want to make a Kingdom Keepers video that was non-spoilery, so I don't. But in general, there's plenty to discuss about books that are not spoilery things, or larger discussions you could have that don't generally spoil what happens within the book. They only extend on the framework of the book. So there's plenty to discuss that would not technically be considered, at least to me, a spoiler. But again, if you're dying to have that conversation, then don't limit your ability to discuss it, just discuss it in a different way. And number 9, shout out. Tell us 5 channels that you enjoy and tag them. I don't know if these people have done this tag, but I'm going to shout out 5 people only to do this tag if they want, but in general just to shout out their channels. The first one would be Lucy. Lucy does lots of read with me's and such, and right now she's pivoting her content, and I'm very proud of her for doing that to maintain her interest. So she's still going to have plenty of bookish content over there, but she's also going to have lots of other stuff. I'd also say Sarah from Sarah's Shelves. If you like how I greet you, you'd love how she greets you on her channel. We'll go some classics for me. Ashley Reads, Danielle from Book Cara, Kelsey from I Read Today. So those are the channels I'm shouting out. If you've already done this tag or you don't want to do this tag, no pressure, just shout out to you, you're great. If I didn't list you and you still want to do this tag, you can of course say I tagged you. All the questions will be in the description box below. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below your answers to these questions if you have them. Is there anything I said that you fundamentally disagree with? Let's have a discourse down below on spoilers. I'd love that. And subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!